here. Well, hello, XJ7. Did you finally track down Spring-Heeled Jack's lost technology? Imagine what we could do with that. I could market it for grannies to get things off the top shelf at the grocery store. We'd make millions and fund this operation for decades. Alas, it escapes you. Well, forget about that and listen to this leap of horrific logic. His name, Andre Skibby, 51. As a man, Andre was expected to be the apex predator of the North American wilds, but as he would shortly discover, man is far down the list. Location, Going to the Sun Mountain, Montana. Date, November 2020. I've known Skibby for a couple decades now. How we know each other is another story for another time. But he verified his account with me, and now I deliver it to your virgin ears, XJ7. No, I wasn't accusing you of being a virgin, XJ7. I know you are a virgin, XJ7. Ha! Just look at your car. Anyway, Skibby is the typical male, dominant alpha, braggart, machismo murder machine most all men wish they could be, but none really are. But they play it in the woods for a week every year in order to feel better for being orthodontists or middle managers in faceless corporations across this fruited plain. And so Skibby would skip out of town into the Rockies in the first week of November to escape the reality of civilization and live within the fantasy of self-reliance and that gritty, dangerous world of wilderness, where the tire meets tarmac and skid marks aplenty are left behind by soft men aspiring to grow harder as they become balder. 2020 was no different. In fact, most of us wanted to be out there to avoid wearing those silly little masks and get away from the bossy Karens. Skibby's wife was a bossy Karen with a face mask penchant, so this trip would be a true vacation. Skibby loaded up the rifle, the handgun, a bunch of ammo and knives and food and clothings, and vanished somewhere in the mountains. His plan was simple. Kill, 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 and then when he felt he had enough, kill again and again. Away from the eyes of the noisome rangers and obnoxious tourists that have fled the area and couldn't witness his meat-gathering skills. He was ready to skin and shred the larger animals and load up a magnum cooler for the winter. The pelts he'd donate to charity. On the south slope of the Going to the Sun Mountain. What a name! You'd find daylight aplenty for the week, vegetation still blasting off, and deer and bears frolicking in the last vestige of sustainability. As the bears were loading themselves for winter, Skibby was perfectly at home while expecting to become some grizzly's pursuit. That's where it began. Skib had felled a titanic buck, purportedly a 12-pointer. Hundreds of pounds, perhaps half a ton, of flesh and bone. And in the aftermath of his rifle shot, he knew he had about 20 minutes tops to get his butcher skills working before visitors would arrive and make a meal out of the hunter's excellent kill, while making an appetizer out of Skibby himself. And true to expectation, behind the man was the clattering jaws and awkward vocalizations of a slavering, desirous, beefy, stuffed and yet still unsated grizzly bear. It had taken a mere 10 minutes. Skibby carefully reached for his rifle across the carcass he was dissecting so perfectly, but hastily, in the afternoon's harsh light. A propitious spin and an expeditious trigger pull, and boom! The man's Hawkeye Alaskan, a .375 Ruger, threw metal right into the beast as it approached slowly from behind. However, he had merely hit the shoulder of that anxious creature, creating a fury unknown to most humans. The grizzly charged. Skibby had a split-second decision to make, and his was to bail behind some trees and get the foul-tempered interloper with a quick reload. And so he did, as the bear skidded into the half-stripped carcass of the buck, only a dozen feet from the man. Another huge report penetrated the forest, and the bear was hit again by another inopportune bullet. This one hit the back, behind the shoulder blade, and wasn't thorough enough to do much more than rend extraneous hide and muscle from that officious animal. But the shots did cause the grizzly to hesitate for a moment, and that was all Andre needed. He pulled out his Smith & Wesson 500 and was plugging the unshored brute with apple-sized holes until it was huffing a final breath next to the initial kill. His ears buzzing, Skib expected to be dazed for a few minutes, and sound to return. But it didn't. As the buzzing abated, and the forest was supposed to come back to life around the nimble Nimrod, it decidedly didn't. There was no sound after 15 minutes. While continuing his tasks, the man realized there wasn't any sound. No birds, or leaves, or bugs, or blusters could be heard. Only the sickly sound of his blade sawing at the flesh, and blood pumping through his ears. It was odd. Indeed, it was so unnervingly odd that the fellow halted his fillets and followed an odd instinct to walk into the woods beyond the kill zone to see what might be invading his existence and dulling nature. This is indeed a common event in many cases of supernatural phenomena. What preternatural powers do these problematic prowlers employ, I ponder? The silence was deafening, as is the common cliché, and it had numbed poor Skibby's brain into a daze that mesmerized him into exploration. He walked onward and onward, the cone of quiet continuing with his trespass into further areas unknown. A squalor erupted. A grunting and huffing moose thrashed upward from a cover of leaves on the ground as it struggled to stand before the encroaching hunter, only to collapse in a bloody mess. Fluid poured forth from the mouth and nostrils of the beast. On closer examination of the departed game was revealed a huge hole in its middle abdomen, puncturing right through to the spine. It was an unsightly mess. The gaping hole was fist-sized, viciously uneven. Was someone using a special bore gun? Perhaps a small cannon like a 4-gauge shotgun or even larger. A 2-gauge loaded with buckball or some odd custom projectile slug. A person would have to be hulking large to use such a weapon, and the noise! Skibby would have heard it. Everyone would have heard it for 3 states and Canada. Skib followed the bloody trail back into the woods, his 500 at hand and refreshed with rounds. A few hundred feet on, trotting over a blanket of orange leaves, the man found another grizzly, not his, dead from a similar wound. But this one was right through the center of its forehead, cleaving the brain encasement asunder in such a deplorably gruesome way. It was inhumane. It was brutal, vicious, weird and icky. Yet a couple hundred feet away was another dead thing, an unknown animal of brown hair and massive volume, slumped across a log. Skibby went onward to see what it was. By the blood splattered about the environment, the trees, the leaves, and the undergrowth, this dead beast wasn't the culprit either, rather the victim of a similar attack. But it was an odd bear at first sight. Rounding the scene, Skibby's mind put together the visual pieces to witness the corpse of a real, live Bigfoot, except it was dead. Slumped over, face up to the sun, its chest exploded outward from a softball-sized penetration, having gone spine to breastbone and then outward. The incomparable, ugly humanoid would have stood close to 12 feet tall, he surmised, and yet it was obliterated so thoroughly and precisely. What could have done this, the man wondered. A fear suddenly coming into his mind. Sweat pouring from his brow, his woolly hunting cap, and a dreaded panic creeping up in that obnoxious silence. In his mind, an invisible enemy had him in his sights. He could feel the damnable predator altering, alerting him in some subconscious method. Skibby knew he was out of his depth. Utilizing his phone, he was able to connect with one last phone call and communicate his location and situation to one last person. Assuming he had not lived twilight, he hastily gave details and switched off. As he rose from a cowering position behind the Bigfoot, the log, and another tree, Skibby mentally prepared for a quick hike out of there and back to his truck several miles along to the south. He'd ditch his winds, his provisions, his gear, and even his rifle, and if by some miracle he'd be able to return the following day, he'd retrieve the items and never look back. That was his initial plan. His second plan was soon to unfold. After rising, he saw a doe approaching the gruesome aftermath of lopsided battle. It was confusing to him. Skibby watched it typically saunter in, sniffing about, large and senseless eyes staring at everything of any interest. Surveying the Bigfoot's flesh and the hole where copious blood had gushed forth moments before. And then the doe lifted her head to look at Skibby as he was partially obscured by a tree. It observed intently, quizzically, and softly bleated, then silence. Then it opened its mouth unnaturally wide and bellowed out a kind of sound you'd only expect from a giant excavation machine. A croaking, whining, growling growl with an underlayment of chains and gears, crying out for transmission fluid and motor oil. It reeled back, standing 9 feet high or more, clasping together both front legs to form a formidable spear, the cloven hooves pointing directly at Skibby. And it flung forward, muscles straining, upper leg muscles ripping wide and enlarging. The twin appendages missed their target, but they pierced the trunk of the erect tree next to Skib and pushed through within a millisecond. Backing up from the bizarre incident, unable to instantly translate whatever was transpiring, Skibby saw the deer, unable to extricate itself from the tree. And so it struggled a moment and spread front legs side to side, forcing the tree to creak and thunder. As the trunk exploded around the impact and the unreal creature was free again, the top of the tree descended and toppling over in the formerly silent forest. Luckily for Skib, the crashing tree's limbs created a physical screen behind which the man could rush and escape the deadly doe while it was still preoccupied with all the movement and distraction of the sound. When everything had settled, the dopey deer attempted to find Skibby, and though he was now 1,000 feet away and running top speed down the side of that mountain slope, it was soon onto him, running faster and faster, drawing a bead on him and soon to connect. Looking back, Skib saw it jump high above him, conjoin its legs, and come hurtling down from the heavens to deliver a most decisive death blow. And this is where it shall be continued, XJ7. Did you really think it would end like this? Nonsense! If you are ruminating on whom Skibby might have called, it was me! Yes, me, Mr. H here. And I was already on my way by the end of this chapter, and soon to arrive at the savage scene to begin my own adventure with this scandalous supernatural scofflaw. So gird thyself, for this shall continue. It must! In the next episode of Dial H for Murder, an H-File exclusive, coming soon. Like and subscribe before I die, and ring the little bell or you will surely go to hell.
spooky stories. This is not a spooky story. Oh, there's no way on the couch I can
it
say.
depends how you look at it. It is kind of spooky.
I guess so.
Wait, that's it? That's the end of the story?
That is a